It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you to all the organizers for having me. I hope over the next 45 minutes to an hour to be able to share some of my experiences. While I pull up my the slides which I'm going to present, I'll just tell you a little bit about my own background. As Shubhangi was introducing me, I'm an engineer by training, and I spent a fair part of my career in the tech world, in the IT space, as it's referred to these days. But then around 15 years back, I made the switch to an environment-friendly job. I worked for 6 years in the solar industry in a place called Selco, where we primarily did a lot of rural solar installations. And that really gave me a good feel for how, what a real green job is all about, right? Where climate and technology and managerial skills and all of this can come together to make people's lives better. So I think for the rest of the presentation, I mean, you can get a lot of statistics about green jobs and India and other things by just typing in the right queries in ChatGPT. So I'm not going to try and kind of cover that ground. I, urge you to look for all the public domain information. I'm going to stick more to what I've seen and what I've experienced, which may be a little specific, but hopefully it will bring out a little more, I would say, authenticity and maybe, you can gain something, or I can share a little bit about my own experience, and that will help you on your career path while you're searching to look for something more meaningful, something more sustainable, more environment friendly, and so on, right? With that, I'm getting into my presentation. And as Shubhangi said, please feel free to ask questions. I'm on a full screen mode while making the presentation, so I may not be able to see the chats, but I've requested the moderators to kind of pose those questions to me as we move forward. It will be more useful to both of us, right? Let's start. We see if I can move this forward. Yes. I hope you can see the slides, and the second slide is on, and I hope everyone can see that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So very quickly on the India-wide, I was just at a conference a couple of days back, and this was about green skilling, and we had, the Council for Green Jobs, which is a skilling council for green jobs, which is basically set up by the Niti Aayog. And we had a lot of people very active in this space of, creating more opportunities for green job speaking. And they were talking about the statistics, right? So today, if you look at green jobs or, and basically a green job is something which is positive on the environment, yet it is rewarding, and it is a job which pays well, and it has a social impact, right? So any job which meets these three criteria, I think, gets classified as a green job. And the statistics show that nearly 3 crore workers, both blue collar and white collar workers, are part of the green job workforce, and that's nearly 6%. Today, the biggest stream of generating green jobs is the renewable energy sector. As you know, India has got very ambitious targets in the solar energy and wind energy and, hydropower and so on. So there is a large workforce employed in that sector. But other sectors like green construction, sustainable agriculture is picking up. Of course, the manufacturing sector is not to be left behind, particularly within that, the electric vehicle manufacturing. And then there's also the usage of electric vehicles in various jobs like the fleets and deliveries and so on. So I think all these sectors are thriving. These are sunrise sectors. And we do see a large number of jobs being generated here. The good news is we will probably see a doubling of these numbers every 5 years. And that's the way India is kind of oriented. So there is a huge opportunity. It's just that, one needs to know where to look for these jobs, right? So after this point, I mean, these are the general statistics. You can go online, you will find a bunch of reports, use any of the AI engines, and it will throw a bunch of statistics at you in terms of how this scenario is changing and improving and so on. But from now on, I will speak more about our own experience. So, I work now at Villgro. Villgro is an incubator of social enterprises. And what we really try to do is bring some of these enterprises who are doing cutting-edge work, cutting-edge innovations into the mainstream by connecting them with the markets and by helping them to build their capacity and scale up, right? So we incubate around 100 social enterprises every year. When I started at Villgro 10 years back, the number was 0. We did not have a single social enterprise which was focused on climate or environment. But I think over the last 10 years, we see that nearly 75% of our incubatees every year are in this space. And if I look at the number just this year alone, the past financial year, we had about 40 enterprises that were actually at the stage of creating jobs, because some will be very early stage and you can't expect job creation to happen. But of the 40 which were in that stage, 5,000 jobs were created, right? And 40% were through direct employment, in other words, their own employees, and 60% were by enabling other green businesses. So we have seen that, even if I take our experience at Villgro and Incubator as a representation of the green job market, which, you could take that leap of faith and say, well, what is happening in this small set of 100 enterprises might be reflected in the larger market. We have a huge growth and we have a huge potential for green job creation, right? By this time, I think, many of you who are just stepping into the sector would be very curious. What are these green jobs? And where exactly is one going to find them? What are the sectors, right? So before we get into that, we should understand that most of these green jobs are kind of linked in some way to what we call climate action, right? Trying to make, the climate or trying to fight against climate change, right? And here I need to explain a few key terms, and pardon me if many of you already know these terms and have use them or come across them frequently. But for the sake of the others, I'm going to explain a few of these terms, right? So most important and most commonly used is a term called mitigation. So climate change mitigation is the process of dealing with the causes of climate change by reducing emissions, right? So when I say that I'm switching from a diesel pump to a solar pump, what I'm effectively replacing that very polluting source of energy, which is diesel or burning diesel, to a much more friendly source of energy, which is solar panels, right? So that's a mitigation step. Similarly, when I'm saying that, I'm switching from, say, sprinkling chemical fertilizer in kind of unregulated quantities on the field, I'm switching from that to, say, organic farming. So I kind of reduce the amount of nitrous oxide or other kind of greenhouse gas emission. Then again, that's a mitigation because I'm cutting down the source which is generating those greenhouse gases, right? And by and large, you will see most of the green jobs today are in this area, which is the mitigation or reducing the or cutting off the causes of the greenhouse gas emissions, right? But equally important, and I think really growing, is the what you see on the bottom right corner, adaptation, right? We are entering into summer. I'm sure many of you are joining from different parts of the country. This year, we are expecting many of the cities to go up to 45, 46 degrees, even higher. That's the effect of climate change, right? Very hot summers, heat waves, unseasonal rains, extremely heavy rainfall at one time, floods, forest fires. I mean, we've all heard of this, right? And as these effects of climate change become more and more visible, we have to accept that climate change is here and now, right? It's no longer in the future. And it's high time, or it's very important that we started adapting to it. So when we hit 47 degrees in a particular city, the construction in that city, the cooling systems, the whole work environment, everything has to adapt to that 47. When, let's say, sea levels rise and water starts flooding into saline water starts flooding agricultural spaces, we better have crops that can work in a saline environment. So that is adaptation. These two are very important. One has to remember. Apart from this, people also talk about resilience, and the vulnerability, of course, is more like assessment of how much a particular community can get affected. But resilience is building parallel paths where if one source of livelihood or one source of sustenance gets impacted, how much are they able to kind of switch immediately or quickly to other sources and thereby become more resilient as a community. So these are the key terms, but most important to remember: mitigation and adaptation. So now, keeping these two key terms in mind, a lot of new work streams are popping up. I mean, new when I say probably last 10 years, so some of these terms are very familiar to all of us, but you can see that, a lot of these areas are really developing very fast. So I'll spend a little time on this slide because it's important. So what are when we say mitigation or prevention of greenhouse gas emission, obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is energy, clean energy and energy efficiency. Similarly, transportation, where we see this huge move towards electric vehicles. Waste management, right? The more waste we put into landfills, the more methane, the greenhouse gas emission is going to happen. So obviously, by managing our waste better, we are significantly mitigating greenhouse gas emission. Industrial process improvements, another huge area of study and research, and action as well, where many of the industries which are heavy polluters, take cement, steel, petroleum, some of these, yes, they may be hard to abate, but at the same time, there is a lot of scope to kind of reduce the greenhouse gas emission through various interventions. Another surprising area where we see a lot of emission happening is agriculture, and particularly dairy, because the amount of greenhouse gas emission from dairy animals is extremely high. And this is methane, not carbon dioxide, which is 9 times as powerful. Greenhouse gas has a 9 times more effect on the global warming. Methane has more than carbon dioxide. Okay. On the adaptation side, as I mentioned to you, assume that climate change has already started, and there are certain measures which need to be taken to adapt society. We talk about land rejuvenation, where land has become barren due to excess heat, or the other thing is handling adverse climate events, where certain, like I said, heat waves or floods, forest fires. These kind of events need to be handled. I already mentioned about saline agriculture, where seawater has crept into the land, and we need to have crops that can adapt to those. Alternative food systems which are not so dependent on climate for their growth and sustenance, and similarly buildings which can tolerate different kind of weather. So that's on mitigation and adaptation side. And at the overlap, you see a bunch of things, right, which are equally important both for mitigation and for adaptation. So this could be things like decentralized energy, right, where energy is not dependent on some kind of a central grid which can collapse. Now this is both clean and it is also contributing to adaptation. Similarly, green infrastructure, right, where the building materials are derived from the local area. You would have seen houses which are constructed from the very earth which is dug in those sites. So there again, it's a mitigation because you're not transporting, you're not using very intense carbon-intensive materials like cement or steel. But at the same time, even if the entire kind of the ecosystem around you collapses due to climate-related events, you can still kind of construct houses or buildings in your locality. And on those lines, you have waste to energy, water conservation, low input agriculture. So I hope these concepts are clear. These are some of the areas, and I actually listed these are areas where there is a lot of action happening in terms of job creation, in terms of innovation, in terms of actually seeing mature solutions hit the market. In this slide, I'm trying to point out where we see a lot of social entrepreneurship activity. Like I said, again, I'm presenting this from Villgro's prism because we are an incubator and we have a ringside view of at least the Indian scenario as far as entrepreneurship activities go. So here we see on the mitigation side, there is a huge amount of activity happening, right? Clean energy, we have programs going on which create livelihoods using decentralized renewable energy. It's called Powering Livelihoods, and we have currently about nearly 20 entrepreneurs working in that cohort. We see every year almost 10 to 15,000 livelihood opportunities are created through the efforts of these entrepreneurs. So it's a very thriving sector. Sustainable transportation. I don't think you need to go far. I'm from the city of Bangalore. I'm sure some of you in this call are as well, and any metro for that matter. You just step out, and today the number of electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers which are being registered every day by far outnumber the number, the ICE vehicles of the same category. So we see that sustainable transportation has really caught on in this country, and that itself is creating so many opportunities. I'm not going to go line by line. I already spoke about these, but suffice it to say that on the mitigation side, we see a lot of action, a lot of activity. Unfortunately, on the adaptation side, it's very, very slow, right? And for perfectly understandable reasons, right? When an entrepreneur enters a field, I don't think they are going to go where, they imagine the government should be, right? So why, when, say, a land has become barren, it is more likely that it's a government project to rejuvenate that land than for an entrepreneur to step in, right? Similarly, if when adverse weather event hits a place, again, it becomes more like a disaster relief rather than, an entrepreneurial space. So definitely on the adaptation side, we see less activity, and that's probably because of two things. One, I think there is a there's still a reluctance to accept that climate change is here and now. And secondly, many people view this as, okay, this is government's work and not, not my work, right? So I think there is an opportunity, an untapped opportunity on the adaptation space. But equally interestingly, you see one small box on the right-hand side, which is the measurement part of it, right? So I think as we get deeper and deeper into climate, it does become very important to be able to measure what impact these various initiatives are having, because these metrics are monetizable, right? We have all heard of the carbon markets, which where in certain areas of intervention, depending upon how much greenhouse gases we are preventing from reaching the atmosphere, we can actually claim carbon credits, right? But behind this is a very sophisticated science or a sophisticated or very sophisticated techniques, which involve measuring very accurately, auditing, which involve, first of all, predicting how much can be saved. So there is a whole lot of, I think there is a whole science and there is a whole stream of professional activity around this measuring of climate impact, or measuring of the climate change mitigation and adaptation, right? So like I said, carbon, there's environmental assessment, and we'll speak a little bit about it as I go forward, especially in terms of ESG and so on. And the other area, of course, is weather risk assessment, right? Today, agriculture in India and worldwide for that matter is heavily dependent on weather. And the minute the weather changes, or we see changes in weather patterns, you do see agriculture getting severely affected. And linked to that are huge investments in terms of insurance, in terms of the downstream purchase of these agricultural commodities and so on. So the weather risk assessment has become another very critical area, kind of coming out of this whole climate, right? Great. So before I step in, next I'm going to talk a little bit about the new job archetypes which we are seeing coming out around this whole climate space, the green job archetypes, so to speak. But maybe if there are any questions so far or any reflections, I'm happy to stop and hear them.
Any questions, folks, that we can take up, or any thoughts that you'd like to share?
Anyway, keep the brain cells ticking. So I will continue, and I have a few more slides, but I'm happy to, after that, we can discuss a little more in terms of your specific questions. I know that many in this group are, already in environment-related jobs, or maybe seeking to enter this field. So happy to take questions, even if they are related to your specific situation, right? Yes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the new job archetypes, or the types of jobs which we are seeing emerging. Again, I don't claim this to be kind of all-encompassing, because this is really what we are seeing in our portfolio, and I felt that's more useful because I can speak a little more authoritatively about those, having personally witnessed some of these jobs come into being. But I'm sure there are more as well, as which you will see coming up in the market. So broadly divided into three categories. First, we are looking at the technical roles, and probably some in this group are engineers, aspiring technologists. So there are a whole lot of new technical roles opening up, right? By the way, most of these pictures, at least the first two set of slides, are from live projects which Villgro is supporting in various places. So obviously, the first and very, I would say, intuitive job role which comes to mind is the clean tech engineer. So when we say clean technology, we already saw a whole range of areas where technology can play its role, right? Starting from renewable energy to waste management, water, electric vehicles, and so on. So the clean tech engineer, of course, this can span, if you go into engineering discipline, then it can span across so many different sub areas, including electrical, electronics, for technologists who are aspiring to get into this space. And I'm happy to take questions on, what are those kind of roles, or what is happening in some of these fields, if anyone has those questions, right? Moving
Ananth,
on.
sorry,
Yes.
I'm just coming in.
Yes.
Ishita has a question. Ishita, would you like to mention it?
Sure. So, hi Anand, you were speaking a little bit about the carbon trading mechanisms when you were speaking about adaptation mitigation. So, in America and Europe, there is a specific system like in place, a proper system for ETS in place. How is the scene in India? Like, is there any development in that space, or are there any jobs that might come up in that specific place?
Sorry, you used an abbreviation. Did you say ETS? And can you expand
Yes,
that for me?
the emission trading system in Europe.
Emission trading. Okay, got it. Got it. Yeah, okay, I can tell you a little bit again, first based on our personal experience, and maybe that's it's you can see the right-most picture, which is a carbon project which Villgro is involved in, and then we can go maybe broaden it to the global scenario. So right now there are mechanisms, for carbon trading. At Villgro, we have got most experience with what is called the voluntary in the voluntary mechanism, right, where we trade carbon credits which are bought and sold on a voluntary basis, right? These are not mandated by any regulator or any kind of a legal system, but these are really voluntary, right? And for that, you have certain exchanges which are set up. So there is one called Vera, which unfortunately today has got a lot of controversy surrounding it for various reasons, which we may not be able to get into today. This is a repetition, but just for the benefit of those who don't know, there is a mechanism which was set up, I think, more than a decade back, starting with something called Kyoto Protocol, where where a bunch of the governments sat together and said that, it's high time we started doing something about global warming. And one of the mechanisms which they decided was, we need to start regulating the emission of greenhouse gases. But it was also decided at the same time that the developed countries like USA, UK, Europe, they've had their chance. They've been the biggest polluters over the last century, whereas the developing countries like India or parts of Asia, Africa, China, they have not, they are just industrialized, right? So the whole mechanism was that, let us, as far as global warming is concerned, it doesn't matter where you stop the gas emission, right? Whether it happens in India or America, it's the same, because ultimately the impact is on the ozone layer, which is several kilometers up there. So it is the same whether you stop the emission in India or in USA, right? So the whole idea was that the developed countries encourage the developing countries to reduce their emission, and they pay for it. Okay, and the payment mechanism, or this whole mechanism, was kind of built around a concept called carbon credit. So for every ton of carbon dioxide or equivalent greenhouse gas that is reduced, that is counted as one carbon credit, and carbon credit becomes a tradable commodity. So, for example, I have a cement factory in the US, and I know that beyond a point I cannot reduce the emission, because cement is a hard to abate industry, steel is a hard to abate industry, petroleum is a hard to abate industry. I will generate certain amount of pollution, whatever, right? So rather than trying to artificially reduce or kind of reduce the efficiency of my plant in the US, I will continue to operate at whatever is the optimum level I can. And that means there's going to be a certain amount of greenhouse gas emission. But to mitigate that, or to offset that, I will buy carbon credits from somebody in a developing country. And therefore, that carbon credit becomes a tradable commodity. This is how the whole system works, right? So I guess, Ishita's question was now, what are the mechanisms which are existing around these carbon credits? And first and foremost, I was talking about the voluntary market, where there are people who are voluntarily buying these carbon credits, right? Typically, these are large corporations in the US who are not under any kind of a mandate or a regulation to buy it, but they generally want to improve their branding. They want to improve their they want to say that they are green, and they are carbon neutral and so on. So the way to go carbon neutral is obviously, for example, a IT company. They may not be having factories which emit, but then their people travel around a lot on planes, and they use a lot of, their own private transport to reach their office. So, you can mitigate or you can kind of neutralize that by buying carbon credits voluntarily from one of the exchanges, right? So that mechanism is happening. And, that's what you see on the right-hand side of this photograph, which is it's a carbon project based around paddy cultivation. Okay, and in paddy cultivation, essentially, you would have seen paddy fields in South India or some of the paddy growing regions. Traditional practice, cover the field in water. So if you walk in a paddy field, you will be up to your ankles in water. And unfortunately, this practice results in a lot of methane emission, because when water covers the soil, the bacteria inside the soil start an anaerobic process. They don't get oxygen, so they start an anaerobic process which produces methane. And methane, as I said, is 9 times as powerful as carbon dioxide when it comes to greenhouse gas effect. Okay, so by preventing the paddy field from getting submerged or inundated, and by keeping the water level, just enough to cover the root of the paddy, not cover the ground, or flood the paddy field, you can significantly reduce methane emission, and that results in some greenhouse gas reduction, and that can become carbon credit. That's what we are doing. The fancy system you see there is something which the moisture level of the soil and tells the farmer when to irrigate and when to stop irrigation. Okay, and that by itself prevents the flooding of the field and reduces the methane emission. So these credits are traded on an exchange called the gold standard. Okay, where again the price of a carbon, for every ton of carbon dioxide or every carbon credit, the rate in the voluntary market could be anywhere between, say, $10 to $20. It depends on the kind of buyer you find. And because it's a voluntary market, the prices are not regulated. So the buyer might be impressed by the project overall, right? They may say that, oh, but apart from in this case, for example, apart from carbon dioxide, you're also saving water because you're not flooding the field, right? So water is also a precious commodity. So that's called a co-benefit, right? So the value of that carbon credit actually goes. Okay, so that's the voluntary market. But I think there is also equally, there is a regulations-based market or regulatory market. Okay, and a lot of these emission trading norms are in place for some of the heavy industry, cement, steel, petroleum, right? Where like I was mentioning, there is no way to kind of reduce the emissions beyond a point. So they are compelled, they are forced to go and buy carbon credits from other parts of the world or from within their own country. So currently, yes, there are ETS systems, as you mentioned, Ishita, in some of the developed countries. But India, so far, I think there's been a lot of talk about setting up a carbon exchange here. And I think it is in very advanced stages. In fact, some announcements have come saying that it has been set up, the mechanism has been approved. I think there have been, both laws passed and budgetary clearances given. As far as I know, it's not operational yet, but it's around the corner. So I think it will happen very soon. I hope that answers your question. It was a long answer, but partly for the benefit of other people.
Yes, thank you so much.
Ananth, we have a hand up.
Yeah, Dhruv has a question.
Please.
Yeah, so I have two parts to my question. You actually answered a bit of it right now. So the first one was, how far is India from adapting it fully or regulating it fully, the carbon credit market, for the companies that exist here? And as you mentioned, companies like steel, for example, steel is a commodity and it's traded globally. How would steel companies adapt with a higher tax if their carbon emissions are taxed? Because they can't remove the process that they're using right now. So how would they adapt in India?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important question, and I think already the EU has brought in a lot of norms about their the imports which are happening. I'm not an expert, Dhruv, so I may not be able to tell you exactly when, what, how it's happening, in terms of the trade implications of carbon. But at least at a higher level, what I can answer is that these industries are extremely difficult to abate beyond a point. So yes, I mean there are certain mechanisms which of the kind of furnaces they're using, the kind of emissions, and how you can kind of prevent the greenhouse gases from escaping, carbon. These are things which are there, but end of the day, steel is a commodity, as you said. It's very price sensitive, so it cannot go. The price cannot go up beyond the point for the consumer. So then they will be forced to buy carbon credits, right? So I think that's where they will have to abate it indirectly by purchasing carbon credit, and that in turn will have a cost implication on the steel itself, and therefore the price of the steel, which then enters the European Union, would be on the higher side, so less competitive, right? I mean, that's the whole idea. So today, the argument which EU is putting forward is, well, India can send us steel, but at a kind of cost-effective price. But that's because they are not following norms that we do have in the EU. So the minute we reach parity, like if they are forced to abide by the same green standards that we are, then automatically the price will go up, and then we'll see the true cost of steel. So I think that's the equation which is playing out. So I think, yeah, the only way to abate it after a certain point is to purchase carbon credits. And I mean, then it depends on the cost of those credits, how much, that becomes a matter of negotiation. There is an exchange. I mean, basically, the exchange is like your stock exchange, right? So based on demand and supply, the cost of those credits might vary. So that is a mechanism which is going to come into play to abate the carbon or to make these industries more green. But yes, there is a price implication to that.
Thank you for answering.
Any other questions before we continue? I think we're good on. I think we can continue. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So then I'm moving on. I mean, in the same slide in the middle, you can see the job which is around energy efficiency. I think this also has become extremely critical these days. So what you see is one of the entrepreneurs we support, and this is a solar-powered cold storage, right? You can see the whole bed of solar panels sitting on top of the cold storage unit. But remember, end of the day, sources like solar are comparatively expensive, right? So the machinery which is using this energy has to be extremely energy efficient, right? So energy efficiency itself is a big area, right? It's a technical area which requires a lot of knowledge, and I think it is opening up a lot of avenues. So one is at a device level energy efficiency, but also at a building level, right? We have seen many startups which are now helping to kind of reduce the energy consumption of corporate offices, of factories, and so on, going to the extent of what is called the saving share model, right? Which is where there is to say a hospital or to a large factory and saying, look, I will at my own cost bring down the energy consumption in your premises, but you have to then pay me 50% of the savings, right? That's called the savings share. So there is no investment from the corporate or from the hospital, but they will pay from what they save, which is a very win-win situation for both the implementer and for the receiver of the service, right? So all these innovative models are coming up, and therefore, things like energy efficiency are coming to the mainstream. So these are some of the more technical roles, I would say, which are open to, or which are available to people from the engineering or technical stream. But looking at managerial roles as well, I think, again, we are seeing a lot. First one is what we call the site supervisor kind of role. So typically, most of the projects in the clean technology space end up, do have, or most of the interventions in the clean technology space are projects, right? I mean, whether it is biogas, whether it is solar energy, whether it is a waste processing plant that you see in the picture here, you need to have these projects established somewhere, and there are a lot of moving parts, be it machinery, be it processes, and so on, and there is a lot of supervisory need in these places. So again, these are roles which are opening up quite a lot. Similarly, in the center you see the green sales role, right? And you might well ask, how is this any different from a regular sales role? What I would say here, and what has been our experience, is that some of these clean tech or new technologies which are environment friendly are indeed new. The concept itself is new, right? You see in the picture, there is a spraying machine which is being used, which significantly reduces the amount of pesticide that is sprayed, right? So you can imagine this, right? We are working with other implementations. For example, there is a huge fodder shortage in India, right? Most of the cattle don't have access to green fodder because the pasture lands are getting cut down. So today people are growing this fodder hydroponically, and that makes sense because it uses very little water and very little energy. But the whole idea of growing fodder for cows in trays, on a rack is very new to a farmer, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that to sell some of these new technologies or new concepts, there is a lot of concept selling and awareness creation needed. So the salesperson who is involved in green technologies has to be not only good at promoting a particular product, but first of all, familiarizing people with that idea, getting them to accept the idea that some such things can be done, right? So I think it's a separate skill in itself. And I feel, increasingly, concept selling has to be taught in some of the business schools. Today, I think a lot of the selling happens around, tried and tested commodities, which is a different skill, of course, but how to sell a green concept without emphasizing the environment friendliness, but rather talking more about the business value, talking more about the economic value. I think that is a skill in itself. And we have seen that being developed in a lot of our portfolio companies. Last but not least, in this picture, you see green procurement. The building, by the way, which you see in the photo, is completely built out of materials that are derived from secondary sources. So it's construction, demolition waste, used and thrown plastics, and so on. So that all the bricks and the mortar which is used there are from such sources. Increasingly, I think a lot of corporates and a lot of environment conscious organizations looking to their inputs, be they construction materials or even some of the usage items which are there in the company. They're looking to source them from, kind of environment-friendly sources. So I think it's important when, even when somebody's in the purchase or procurement department to be aware of some of these developments and to start specializing in sustainable procurement. A whole bunch of corporate and financial roles are opening up. Many of you would have heard, pardon the picture, these are all chat GPT generated, but, just to represent. The climate investment analyst, I think you would have all seen the activity on the climate financing front. I do believe I was told that there may be some talks in the same series later on, which are talking about climate finance, but it is definitely an up and coming area today. Climate investment, or analyzing an investment, not only from the financial sense, but also from its impact on climate. That's a separate skill in itself. And there is a new set of jobs which is kind of emerging around this. Second, I'm talking about ESG auditing. I mean, many of you will be aware that already corporate India, at least the top companies, are mandated to report their environmental, social, and governance parameters. And this mandate is going to only widen. In fact, now the SEBI, or Security and Exchange Board of India, has recognized a separate category called ESG auditor. So if you are giving environmental ratings or ESG ratings, then you have to say this was not the case earlier, but now it has been mandated. So this has again become a very formal area of work and a very important area of work, which I think all companies, big and small, sooner rather than later, will be against. And attached to this is also various spin-offs. Like, for example, there are ESG funds out there, right? People or funds who claim to invest only in companies with a sound ESG rating. And again, unless the ESG rating is done scientifically, these funds will not be able to function. Similarly, you would have heard of a concept called social stock exchange, right? Social stock exchange is where you can list yourself on this. It's like your regular stock exchange, but you are basically listing your impact. You're listing there, claiming that you can make an impact, and you're asking invest or donate to your cause, right? And here also measurement becomes very critical, because just like a company on the exchange, on the financial exchange, gets audited for its financials, similarly a company on the social stock exchange has to get audited for its environmental impact, and this has to be done in a very systematic manner. So I think this whole area of ESG auditing, environmental auditing, is really mushrooming now. And last but definitely not least is a climate policy analyst. I think today, both at a central level, at a state level, even at a corporate level, climate, everybody has a climate policy, has an ESG policy, right? So it becomes, somebody who understands, I think on both sides, right? On one side, somebody who contributes towards these policy initiatives by by mapping the ground situation and making that available to the policymakers. And on the other side, when there is an existing policy, how to make best use of it, how to stay within the ambit of a policy or a regulation, that knowledge also becomes very important. So that climate policy analyst, I think today we see a lot of, kind of both for-profit and not-for-profit organizations which are coming up, which are talking about climate policy. Yeah, so these are some of the roles which I have seen, in my own experience, and in my organization's experience, which are coming up. I'm sure there are a lot more, which might be, again, coming up in the green job space, but these I could speak from personal experience. I'll stop here now. I don't have any more slides, but absolutely open to any questions or any queries or, ideas that might pop up in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Ananth. We actually have a question with regards to green concept selling. Adrika, would you like to mention that? Adrika, are you able to hear us? I think I'll just make a note of it. So basically, she wants to know, can we get an example of how to sell a green concept, including both environmental issues as well as the business values?
Sure. I mean, I like to go back to one of the early examples in my career. Like I told you, after a 14-year stint in the corporate world, I switched to the environment side of things by working in an organization called Selco. Selco was one of the pioneers in rural solar electrification, right? And remember, we are talking, I joined them in 2009 or 2010, I think. So there was still a lot of unelectrified villages in India, and Selco used to operate mainly in Karnataka. A lot of work was done in the hilly regions, right? And I've been to some of these places, very, very poor households. But yet we were trying to go and sell them solar systems, solar home lighting systems, which cost around between 8 to 10,000 rupees, right? Which were obviously very environment friendly and all that. And these were homes which are using kerosene lamps otherwise. So the pitch we used to go and do to these homes was something like this, right? First of all, we would never talk about the environment aspect, pollution, greenhouse gas. I think these were all kept far away locked in some suitcase, not to be talked about at all, right? What we used to go and first we used to ask, okay, how much do you spend on kerosene every day? So then, the people used to come out with the expenditure, and it was pretty high because in those days, the government used to provide some kerosene through the ration shops, but bulk of it was bought in black market, right? So let's say the spend on kerosene would be approximately, like around 10 rupees per day or so. So that works out to around 300 rupees a month, right? Then we used to say the same thing. Now, suppose you install a solar home lighting system in your house, we will get you a loan from the bank because there was a scheme at the time to get a loan. And the loan, the EMI for that loan will be 200 rupees per month, okay? So you're actually saving 100 rupees a month by going for this. Forget about everything else, you're saving 100 rupees a month. So this is the value proposition to you, right? So the point I'm trying to emphasize is, to sell a green concept, I think one has to, for a moment, think from the perspective of the buyer, what is in it for them? That is the most important thing, right? And I think it's highly unlikely, barring a very, very small percentage of people who would be willing to spend extra money just to be environment friendly, most people look for some kind of economic benefit, financial benefit, cost saving, better livelihood. Something should be there in it for them, which translates to a better life, right? So look for that aspect, try to emphasize that. And then, by the way, you can talk about environment. So that's really the icing on the cake, right? Then putting first and foremost, which I think doesn't work, okay? So I hope this example clarifies. I'm sure for every product, every service which is environment friendly, you can always find something that is relevant for that person. For example, when we sell livelihood products, right? You saw the solar powered cold storage over there, or like I was talking about solar pumps and so on. What we talk about then, like for example, a solar pump, right? It costs anything, a 2 HP pump, I think by today's rate would be around 1.2 lakhs or so. And of course, there's a government subsidy. So all put together, maybe 75,000, 80,000 rupees. Now, for that price, why would somebody invest that much money, right? the reason we explain to them is by putting this pump, you can actually get an extra crop every year, right? Because you have your kharif, you have rabi, but you can do an in-between crop of vegetables. And this is what you can kind of, this is how much you can sell that crop for. And therefore, in 2 years, your pump pays for itself. So yeah, I hope that example, you need to project what is in it for the buyer and then only talk about the environmental aspect.
Thank you, Ananth. I think Darshana has a question. And
Yes, please.
Hello. Hi, Ananth. Firstly, thanks a lot for a very insightful session. I have actually two questions for you. One is based on actually the kind of experience that you are, getting at Villgro, because you deal with a lot of startups and young practitioners and, this kind of ecosystem. I would like to know that what is the, and also your session has not actually mentioned this aspect till now. What is the role of climate communications in the sector currently, and what kind of roles do exist out there from your experience, if you could tell me? That's the first question. And second is actually just following up on the current conversation about the green procurement. So if green procurement, you were selling green concept and solar devices to uh, you know, uh, families, how would this kind of thing work out at a corporate scale? So if, let's say, basically somebody has to, for just to give an example, a better packaging, which could be a bit more expensive, but in the long run could be very environmentally friendly. How could one do that at a corporate scale? How could one incentivize buying this kind of stuff? So thanks a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I'll make a note to include green communication in my next set of slides when I talk to some audience. Thank you much for that, Darshana. But it is a very important area. I think like any new area, right, the more there is communication, the more people become aware, right? And today, I think a lot of people, even those who are, I would say, enlightened customers or discerning customers, are not aware of some of the alternatives out there, are not aware of some of the consequences of the choices they are making. And I think the only way to solve that is through communication. I think it's an emerging space, definitely, as far as job opportunities are concerned. We do know of multiple, I mean, even within Villgro, we put a lot of emphasis on communication, and our communication team has been growing over the years, both in terms of numbers and also the seniority of the people involved, so that, because we have recognized how important it is to have good communications. But we are a small organization, and there are specialist organizations now who are spending a lot of time on communicating these messages, and again through all different channels. So I think today, just as the traditional means of communication are important, equally so are the emerging, like the online media, social media, and so on. Very interestingly, when we did a survey of how best to sell a product in rural areas, right? We found that, earlier we used to, in my Selco days, we used to do wall paintings, to promote in villages and all that, there will be wall painting talking about. And today also, if you go to many villages, you will see wall paintings talking about, some new product or some new mobile phone or whatever. But we were told, look, the most effective way is YouTube influencers. And there are people, who have huge followings in rural areas, running into millions of viewers, right? And one video put on one of these influencer channels, just same as it works in urban areas, in rural areas also, there is this following, and that is actually much more effective than the traditional means of communication. So anyway, long run, I think communication is very critical, and it's an emerging area. And I think it is also specialized, because for the same reason that it is important to kind of nudge, right? It's not like, I think by just highlighting the green aspect, you're not going to get very far, right? It will have to be that, that is blended with the messaging of how important or what's in it for the consumer. Then only. Coming to your second question about procurement, I think, see, I mean, I don't want to be cynical, but corporate decisions are made purely in terms of, profit, shareholder value, etc., and regulatory compliance. So what I've seen work best with corporate is, if there is a regulation, they have to abide by it, then they will do it. If there is nothing, then it is highly unlikely that, somebody, yes, I mean, again, like I said, many of the new age companies where they are looking to tap into, say, fund or impact funds, they will abide. So without taking names, I prominent kind of a doorstep food provider. I mean, we all use them, so you can guess the name. But they were not able to tap into the ESG funding for a very long time because they were packaging in plastic containers, right? And that had become and also they were delivering on the regular petrol vehicles. So you would have seen a gradual shift of this particular organization, firstly to delivery by EVs, and secondly to sustainable packaging. The reason why they did it was because then they get access to the huge investments through ESG funds, which is today a very significant kind of a funding pool, especially in the startup sector, right? So there'll be reasons like that, but it will be very much driven by profit, finance, etc., and not through any kind of altruism or goodwill. Okay, so we'll have to take that very cynical view and look, okay, where is that pain point? Like, for example, sewage treatment, right? A lot of these guys are governed by very strict environmental laws, right? So then you can go and talk to them saying, look, I mean, here's a way to meet your environmental, or, the regulatory aspect, right? But just going and saying this is a greener way, I don't think it will make much headway. So you'll have to find what it is that makes economic and business sense.
Thank you, Anand. Ishita has a follow-on question. Ishita, would you like to go ahead?
Am I audible? Is there some background noise?
You're good. We're able to hear you.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand what kind of skills are basically required, specifically want to transition to a green job in the corporate sector. For example, in sustainability consulting, I understand the skills differ for each role. For example, for climate finance, there might be some specific skills you need. But just to start, what are some key initial skills that we can learn and then maybe transition into this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that, I've already covered quite a range of jobs which are there, and depending on what you're targeting, you need skills. So if it's a technical role, you probably need those kind of technical skills. But I think overall, if I were to look at certain skills, one is, of course, an awareness of what is happening in the environment and climate space, right? You need to be familiar with terms like, with greenhouse gas emission, carbon, ESG. You need to do a lot of reading around those terms. You need to be, familiar with what is going on. I think more importantly, what are some of the levers, right? In corporate world, since you're talking about entering into the corporate world, what are some of the levers which are being pressed in the corporate world to push them towards more environment-friendly behavior, right? Like ESG is definitely one of them. And again, when you talk about ESG, what is it? Like some of them report ESG just so that they can appear better and their brand value improves. Some of them report ESG because they are compelled to do so by regulation. So you need to understand some of those differences, right? I think beyond that, there are specific skills, Ishita, which you have to look at, in terms of if you're looking at finance, then definitely you need to be comfortable with numbers. You need to be, apart from having that environment consciousness and awareness of what is going on, you need to be familiar with, what kind of, more on the financials, like if you're looking at investment side, you need to be quite comfortable looking at their financial statements and so on. Similarly on technical roles. But I would say the common skill is awareness of the environment and regulatory aspects.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Shita. Thank you, Ananth. Induja, I think you had a similar question. So would you like to add to it?
Yeah, so I did not read Ishita's question now. My question would be like in terms of the freshers. I'm not pursuing a sustainability or environmental engineering course. And if I wanted, get into climate sector, what is the scope for freshers and what skills do I have to learn to get into the roles that you mentioned previously? That was
Right. What is the stream you're following? Is it a technical stream or what kind of stream are you following right now?
more like corporate and international roles, something. I'm a student now, so I want
Right.
to.
What course are you doing?
My course in engineering is biomedical engineering.
Biomedical. Right. So as a technical person, I think, see, there's no, I mean, what I would say is then you be a little choosy about where you apply to, right? Obviously, if you're going to apply let's say, like many of your batchmates would be doing, you apply to a IT giant, right? It's unlikely that you're going to land in a environment or sustainability kind of a role, right? Though that's maybe the lowest hanging fruit as far as job opportunities are concerned, right? But if you're okay to be a little choosy, a little more patient, then you apply to a few places where you do see that there is a environment aspect to it, right? I mentioned some of the streams, right? And especially for biomedical and all that. I mean, even within, you can think about, because some of the skills are transferable to other areas, like, we spoke about, say, sewage treatment, wastewater, some of those areas, right? So you can pick and choose some of those areas and make sure that your job applications are going there. Get a head start initially. I mean, particularly in this sector, I feel, if you're really passionate about it, maybe the initial break might not be the most lucrative or remunerative, but I think you should still take that up and get into a sector. And then, of course, the career prospects will definitely improve, right? So the only way I would say is to be a little picky and choosy about where your first job opening happens. The minute you get sucked into the corporate machine, like especially some of the large, IT players, then it's unlikely that you will end up in some of these sectors. So just as long as you're careful about what you're choosing, I think you'll be good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dhruv, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question, but it was more about what skills are required. But I also have another question. So in Villgro, you're looking at a lot of entrepreneurs that come to you. So what would be a few things that set the successful ones apart, or maybe what do you look for in an entrepreneur that he'll be good at what he's doing in this space specifically?
Yeah, I think we have a certain rubric which we use to evaluate, but leaving that aside, I would say 2, 3 things, right? One, of course, is the passion and the entrepreneurial spirit. So we evaluate the team very closely to see, how much they are really keen about taking this, not only the idea itself, but also scaling the idea, right? Second and very important thing is kind of the customer knowledge or the market knowledge which they bring, right? Especially in this sector. World and all, which is very admirable. But somewhere I think that has to translate into an understanding of what customer is willing to pay for, what will translate into a good business, right? So we do evaluate that very carefully to see if the entrepreneur has come to us after studying the market, after talking to enough number of people, after piloting some ideas and assessing a willingness to pay for those ideas, right? So just having that, just a view that I want to change the world, that's not enough for us. You need to see some practicality to it. That becomes a very important parameter. And last but not least is the business plan. Like what exactly is going to be the how is the business going to look like? How is it going to scale? These are very, very important aspects, because otherwise you'll end up with a good idea, but which is not going to scale. And end of the day, as an incubator, we do want to see scalable businesses which we help to build.
Okay, thank you.
Parag, would you like to go next? Are you able to hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. As of now, I think that he answered my question, so I'm okay with it. By the way, I have one more question. What are the current gaps in the carbon market? As we can see, there are various stakeholders in carbon market. But I would like to know, in your own personal opinion, what would be the opportunity rising in carbon market?
It's my opinion, okay? I'm not, again, a global expert. And there are, like I said, there are 2 parts to carbon market. One is this voluntary market. One is the regulation-driven market. Speaking on voluntary market, what I've seen, I think 2 issues are there. One, there are many technologies or many interventions which can cut down greenhouse gas emission. However, not all of them are eligible for carbon market, okay? So I gave you the example of the paddy cultivation, right? And that is a technique called AWD, or alternate wetting and drying. This is a very well understood technique. So the minute I say AWD, any regulator, any carbon market player will understand, okay, whether it's a gold standard, whether it's Vera, whether it's somebody else, they'll say, oh, you're doing AWD. Okay, for every hectare you carry out AWD, this is the kind of money which you can, or these are the number of carbon credits which you can expect to have every year, okay? But there are other interventions. See, I was speaking to you about green fodder, right? Now, as I mentioned to you, there is a lot of methane emission happening from livestock. However, if let's say I find a way of reducing that, like by, typically it is said and it is experimentally found also that feeding green fodder to the cattle as compared to dry fodder, you significantly reduce the methane emission from the dairy farm. Okay. But there is no way of measuring this. Okay. There is no accepted methodology which allows me to quantify that saving. So I cannot register a carbon project for this particular thing, like a dairy intervention, right? Whereas it's very easy to do it for a paddy intervention. So this is one big gap that, though there may be very effective ways of reducing greenhouse gas emission, which scientists do acknowledge that, yes, this is a way of doing it. The regulatory, or rather the exchanges which register these carbon projects, they don't accept. So, okay, and the procedure to get something like this registered is very, very cumbersome. So this is one gap which I see. Okay. Second is the cost of, okay, because it's a very elaborate process that, starting with first you have to create a project report. Okay. And that project report has to get accepted. And usually this is done through some consultant who are pretty expensive. Then once that report gets accepted, there are a lot of fees associated with registering these projects. And then there comes the fees related to auditing the project, which is also very exorbitant, right? So usually what happens is small carbon projects don't make sense. You have to do it on a large scale. And many of the startups are not able to do it on a large scale, though they are doing very important and useful work in the carbon market. So this whole cost structure has become very prohibitive today in terms of registering new carbon projects, right? I think this is also a huge gap which needs to be addressed one way or the other, either through automated kind of measurement and auditing, or through generally bringing down the cost of this whole carbon project registry and so on. So I think these are, I would say, two big areas today which I have seen as gaps in the market. Parag.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Priya, would you like to go next?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for such a wonderful session. I have questioned that sustainability consulting and climate action are evolving rapidly with trends like net zero strategies, ESG integration, and climate finance. As a fresher, I want to build a strong foundation in this field. So, could you share insight on the key skills and knowledge assets I should focus on? And also, how can I stay updated with emerging trends and position myself for career opportunity? Thank you.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good aspiration that you're looking to enter this space. And like I said, I think, and you also correctly identified that these are big areas like ESG consulting, for example, right? This is definitely a big area which is coming up. So I think, as far as skills are concerned, Priya, what is the stream which you are following now? Is it engineering stream or something else?
Actually, my academic background is a master in environmental science, and last from 2 years, I work in health sector, public health.
Public health. Okay. So then I think academically you're well suited and qualified, for this area. I think as far as skills are concerned, like I said, it's very important to understand, the carbon accounting part of things, and probably that would have got covered, what we call the life cycle analysis, right? So what is the carbon footprint of an organization, or for that matter of a product, from cradle to grave, as we say, right? Right from the materials which go into the product, to the manufacturing of the product, to the transportation, to its end use, and then the carbon generated during the use of the product, then the display of the product. So this is the cradle to grave cycle. What is the kind of carbon footprint at each stage, right? And for every product or every service, it could be different, right? For example, you might have a very, very energy efficient product. So during the operation of that product, let's say a solar pump, it might be, very, very carbon negative also during that time. But unfortunately, that pump and all the components are coming from China. So then I have to add the shipping cost, right? For every pump, it is traveling across the sea to reach the end destination. So if I see the life cycle analysis, it is actually very bad, right? Because so I'm just giving an example. One has to have a good understanding of this cycle, right? Because ultimately everything boils down to that. When I'm doing an environmental assessment of something, I have to look at it holistically from cradle to grave kind of a cycle. So once you get into that, right, then you become much more. I think that skill of analyzing, of being able to do kind of a carbon audit, life cycle analysis, that becomes very important from an environmental point of view. Of course, the social aspect, again, that comes down to kind of some of the social metrics companies, and that will be different for each side of each company, but it will be in terms of, again, like how the well-being of both the employees of the company as well as some of the communities which are impacted or live around the place of work of these companies and so on. But I would say in the ESG, probably the E is the most complicated, and I think your qualification is towards that. So if you're able to build upon that and talk authoritatively about carbon footprint, about life cycle analysis, about greenhouse gas emissions and so on, I think when you sit for an interview, when you talk to somebody, those will be very well appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay.